Hello, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the session on board readiness. We have with us today Angela Browley, who is one of our co-founders and one of our board members, as well as Elizabeth Fowler, who is on our National Advisory Council. So they will talk to you today about board readiness, and then I will be walking around later for questions if anyone has any. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. So as Lorna said, my name's Angela Brawley, and we are delighted that you are here today to hear about board readiness. There are many women in the policy circle who are involved in boards of public companies, boards of not-for-profit companies, boards and commissions in their state and local governments. And so whether it's one of those categories or not, we think there's a lot that the policy circle has to offer. I'm joined today by Elizabeth Fowler, and Elizabeth is the director of Triad Foundation. She serves on the board of the Academy Preparatory School and Frameworks of Tampa Bay. She also serves on the board of the Lowry Park Zoo Endowment Foundation. And she and her husband, Troy, are active in supporting nonprofits focusing on freedom and free enterprise, character development, and emotional intelligence skills for children, and addiction recovery services, among others, in Tampa. So Elizabeth has served on both a corporate board and a number of not-for-profit boards, and so she's really got a lot of good insights about that she's going to share today. I am passionate about my one not-for-profit board role, which is as a co-founder and board member for the Policy Circle. All the wood's behind that arrow, as they say. And my day job is I serve on public company boards. So I serve on the board of Brookfield Asset Management, ExxonMobil, and Procter & Gamble. And I formerly served on the board of Lowe's, the home improvement store. So at the end of our little talk, you're going to hear from Betsy Adkins. And Betsy is a networker extraordinaire. She is a 3-time CEO, a multiple board member, and she literally wrote the book on corporate governance and becoming a board member. And those are in your bags from the Policy Circle. We're grateful for Betsy. We're going to show a little clip of Betsy in a minute, but we are going to encourage you to go to the website and see the full interview. Stacy interviewed Betsy, and that's available. So today we're going to talk about board memberships, the different types, what qualifications might be the most appropriate, how the Policy Circle can help prepare you for becoming a board member. So Elizabeth, let's talk a little bit about not-for-profit boards, because you've been on both a for-profit board and not-for-profit boards. So talk about why you would be on a board in either category.
Well, we have our lives, right? We have the things that we do for our job, we have our families, and then there's this greater community out there that I frankly was not aware of. As a banker for 13 years in corporate banking, I was so consumed by that and starting a family and all of those things that I just really was kind of oblivious to that third sector that's out there solving a lot of problems. And it wasn't until the bank said, you have to do something outside of the bank. And I said, what? And they said, well, anything, pick something. So Big Brothers Big Sisters was appealing to me, so I did that for a while and eventually got involved in my children's Episcopal day school, and then started to see that this is really fun. And there are cool people out here that I can learn from and get to know, and I was learning as I went along on how to serve on a board and what boards do and how the structure works. And you know, for me, it was rounding out my life and taking skills I had as a banker and using those externally, whether it be fundraising or financial stewardship of resources or programming, and eventually led to social entrepreneurship, where we started a number of nonprofits in Tampa, filling a gap that needed to be filled and didn't exist, and kind of went from there.
You know, you raised it. What do boards do? I think we kind of assume people know what boards do, but they often don't know. So what does a board do?
Well, a board provides the governance of a nonprofit. If you think of a nonprofit, most of them don't sell anything, they sell service, right? They're solving a problem. And a board's primary role in a nonprofit world is to raise money for that. And their other role is to bring their skills to the table. And those skills really don't even have to have huge skills if you have a great passion. So your skills could be in governance, they could be in fundraising, they could be in programs that you just are really excited about what the nonprofit does and you want to get more engaged on the ground. So you bring those things to bear, but by being a board together, you are using the brain power of people with very different and diverse experiences to make that nonprofit better, to make them more effective, to make sure the community knows what they do, how they do it, why they do it, and how do you prove that it works. So it takes an oversight board. It gives a lot of credibility to the community that it is oversight. But what a board doesn't do is micromanage the work. And I think of it as an hourglass, in that the board's on the top of the hourglass, the CEO is the skinny part, and below that is the staff carrying out the work. And it's really important that it work that way because the board hires a CEO and the CEO manages the staff. And if the CEO doesn't manage well, then the board has to take action. But if they are managing well, it's the board's business to support, raise money, and stay out of the day-to-day work. The trouble comes when board members get too engaged in stuff on the ground and bypass the CEO. And surprisingly, that does happen.
There's a concept, noses in, fingers out. So Stacy will tell me next time we have a board meeting, Angela, noses in, fingers out. But it really is important because it is about oversight. It's about strategy and risk and succession planning. It's really not about trying to be looking over the shoulder of management and trying to micromanage. So what kind of skills do you think are most important to serving on a not-for-profit board?
I really think the skills draw from your personal experience and your passion and your careers. What you do, if you're a lawyer, then you have skills that a nonprofit can use. If you're an accountant, you have those skills. If you're a mom, you have those skills. And it's just a matter of understanding where those skills fit into the structure. But the great thing about the nonprofit world is there is room for everyone. And it's all a passion business. Nobody gets paid. You get paid in joy in seeing the work being done and the cool people you meet along the way. And if you have the will, there's a way. And there are plenty of ways to learn how to be a board member. There are resources and books and Policy Network as well, or Policy Circle as well. So you can take advantage of all of those. But if you're a self-starter and you're going to volunteer for a board, you'll figure it out.
So let's dig a little deeper in that. What do you think can be learned at the Policy Circle that would make someone a better board member?
I think the Policy Circle, it just makes us all smarter. We learn about all the issues out there, and as you go through the Policy Circle briefs and you start to learn about the greater world, everything feeds into the community that you live in. And the reality is most of the things that we have power over changing are our own communities. So where policies translate to a nonprofit work, it just helps you do your work that much better. And for a lot of what we do, which is helping children develop character and EQ, which is emotional intelligence, is those life skills that schools don't always get around to teaching, you have to bring all the resources to bear to do that, but you also have to work within a school district. So you have to understand how a school district works, and how does a school board work, and who makes the rules, and who decides what's a priority. Because as I'm sure you all know, teachers, they're totally overwhelmed with what they have to teach and what comes at them on a daily basis. And you have to understand where the priorities are. And for example, in the social emotional intelligence work, it's basically teaching kids to manage their emotions so they don't manage them. And we had to convince the school district that they would say, this is just another thing on the teacher's plate. And we're like, no, it's the plate. Because if you get this part right, if you connect with your kids, they connect with each other, and you help them with coping skills, everything you teach is going to be much more effective. So working through the layers of the bureaucracy and also the school board to make sure it happens from the top and the bottom, you have to understand the policies within a district. So that's kind of a microcosm of all of the policy work that you all share.
So another thing that you're going to hear more about is the Policy Circle CLEAR program. Looks like CLEAR on the website because it's CLER, but it really is preparing women for leadership in the policy circle. And Kim Borchers, who runs that program, her job at one point in her career was getting women and appointing all appointees to boards and commissions at a state level. So there are opportunities that are local and statewide that the CLEAR program, as well as becoming a not-for-profit or a for-profit board member, where that program could really be helpful as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about corporate board members. We're going to hear from Betsy Adkins for a minute, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So in terms of serving on corporate boards, a lot of corporate board opportunities that exist or you learn about are really through your networks. And the question you have to ask yourself is, does your network know that you are interested in being on a board? And I'd go even further than that. What board do you want to be on and why? What value can you bring to that board of directors? The best, there are a number of programs, and I've seen them over the last 20 years, really, of helping women get on boards of directors. A lot of the most effective ones come when someone you know from your life, your service on other boards, or in your career, when there's someone who was a mentor, a boss, someone who supported you, really becomes your advocate to be on boards. One of the ways I think you do that is not through just a beautiful bio, because oftentimes people don't have time to read that. I'd focus on a really great paragraph, because then you can send that paragraph. They'll read it before they knew they read it. You can attach your beautiful bio, but the idea is make sure they know you're interested and that you're doing everything you can to make them your advocate to be on a board of directors. I would say there also are a number of board readiness programs that exist out there. There's one called Direct Women, which takes women lawyers and helps them get ready to serve on boards of directors. One's called the Women Corporate Directors, or WCD. It has board readiness programs. It also has essentially board women fellowship organizations in large cities, but they do also advertise essentially within the WCD network opportunities, board openings where they're specifically available. And then there are a number of board readiness programs put on by the big four accounting firms. I know Deloitte has one in several cities that is literally like our CLEAR program as well, where you go for 6 sessions or over a period of time and you get kind of certified to be on boards of directors. So we're going to run the video and we're going to hear from Betsy Adkins, whose book you have, a little bit about boards. So Lorna, can we turn on the video?
I think boards are always best served when there's a very diverse set of experiences and backgrounds. You want to have people from international and global backgrounds. You want to have people from different age groups, different economic demographics, different functional backgrounds, because the more varied the backgrounds of the people, the richer the conversation, and the more likely with diverse thought that you have really good debate and you think about ideas and opportunities that by yourself you don't come up with. And you also draw on everyone else's experience about a risk to avoid or an experience that somebody had growing through a particular stage or in a particular industry or entering a new market. So the more diverse the boardroom makeup, which is typically 10 to 12 people, although lesser is better, and you can certainly have a board go public with as few as 5, you have a better discussion. So my goal in writing the book was for everybody here to see that, to demystify it and explain how to get access to the boardroom, because it's very opaque. and Byzantine, and deliberately so. It's kind of like a secret club. And so making it more understandable. How do you get into the boardroom? What goes on in the boardroom? How do you add value? Because anyone who is interested in the policy circle and participating has sort of self-selected as someone who cares a lot about the intersection of policy and business and has informed views. And there's no reason people shouldn't aspire to join a board.
Thank you, Betsy. Okay, now we're going to open it up. This is the workshop part of this, to your questions or comments, if you have them.
If you have a question, just raise your hand and I will come around.
Hello. You talked a lot about the nonprofit and private organizational boards, and a little bit about being appointed to a public or a board or commission. Can you talk about the difference between serving as an appointed person or someone who has actively sought appointment on a private or nonprofit board? Like, what are the difference between those public appointments versus nonprofit organizations?
So you've been on both, Elizabeth. What's your perspective on that?
The bank, I was on a bank board, and because I had banking experience, I was approached by someone who knew me back in those days and said, you know, we need a board member, come interview. And I went through that and made sure I was capable of doing that. I'd lost a lot over 20 years, but managed to get it back. But with nonprofit boards, usually you can go out and actively seek people, and that's usually what we do. Is we have our board members go find board members who fit these needs that we have. But sometimes someone just comes to one of our events and then says, "How can I be more engaged?" And you can apply to be on a board, and there's usually a process where the governance committee members will meet with you and see what you want to get out of it, and you can assess that nonprofit and see if it's a good fit for you. Sometimes you may not say, I'm not quite ready for that, or I don't want to do all the fundraising part quite yet, and then you can serve on a committee, because a lot of nonprofit boards have what they call advisory committees, which are people from the community that want to have input but don't quite want the board responsibility, because often with a nonprofit there is a give or get requirement of fundraising, which some people aren't ready for. So it gives them a way to dip their toe in the water, bring their skills to bear, but also not have the commitment yet. But some people come directly on the board and say, I can do all that and I want to help, and they do. So it's kind of a give and take process of just making sure it's the right fit for everybody. But I think it's harder to get on a corporate board because you're going to be paid. They need skills, and you need to be able to be pretty crisp on your training, where I think with the nonprofit work, it's passion-based, and you grow from there.
I would say there's a bit of a debate in the corporate board opportunities. I've heard search firm people say being on a not-for-profit board isn't going to necessarily get you on a for-profit board. I disagree with that, because I think board experiences, like we've talked about, are very similar because it's corporate governance in one way or another. The other thing, early in my career, when I was young and had young children, one of my board members invited me to be on the board of United Way in Missouri, and I joined, and it was the beginning of a lifelong relationship with United Way, which I'm so grateful for. But it also began to teach me about board dynamics and how they really work, and what committees were, and how that really worked. Also, being a public company board member has a certain set of responsibilities and obligations. But remember, there's all kinds and sizes of public company boards and public companies. There's also private companies. When you learn about Betsy, she serves on the board of the Wynn Corporation in Las Vegas, and she also serves on Volvo, and Volvo's private. So there might be business boards that are private, and banking experience is good to bring to bear. You know, there's a lot of skill sets. You know, being an audit committee, a public company audit committee chair requires that you be a financial expert. So there may be parts of your skill set that really fit into either private companies, into public companies, into boards and commissions, into not-for-profits. I would learn from all those experiences and use them as part of your paragraph in your bio about why you'd be good for another board. So, more questions, comments? Yes, we got one over here.
Thank you. So I was super involved in a lot of the organizations like 8-10 years ago, 30% Club and other groups that were pushing particularly Fortune 500 companies around board diversity. And I feel like I've been a little out of it lately. But one of the issues that came up over and over again was just how narrowly boards thought about the kinds of people they wanted on their boards. That one of the recurring problems was they always wanted someone who'd been a CEO, a CFO, and there are obviously very few women overall who've served in those kind. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. Not a lot of women have ever become a CEO. You're obviously an exception, but the numbers are not great. It's 4%. And so that was limiting the pool. I wonder but there were a lot of conversations that boards were sort of opening their minds to different kinds of experiences, marketing experience, HR, other kinds of things that might be helpful. And I wondered your perspective on this. Do you see that changing now? Are you seeing sort of an openness to, especially for women, more diverse kinds of backgrounds and roles than it seems like there was a period where that was just like, you couldn't be considered if you hadn't been a CEO.
Absolutely. So I was involved over the years in those kind of programs too, the 30% Club. It was really trying to get for either more turnover on boards so that as men left, women could get appointed. I think this year, or maybe it was last year, the increase of women on boards was like 20 or 24%. So it's really starting to have a little momentum. I think what does that as well is, but way back in the day, you would have a senator on your board, you'd have a lawyer on your board, you'd have, it was kind of people that fit certain categories, and those categories have changed. So and they're still evolving, to your point about looking beyond the CEO job, because that kind of dictated that there'd be few women encouraged or invited to join these boards. And so you need to go maybe one step further. So is it the woman CFO who is a financial expert, who could fulfill a future audit committee chair role? On one of my boards, we invited a 40-year-old woman who was from IT because of cybersecurity issues and risks and social media. And so that was kind of unheard of at the time. So I would say yes, I think that's evolving quite a bit. It's going beyond the CEO definition. And one of the ways that you can get to that is a skills matrix, which Elizabeth might talk about as well for not-for-profits, where you literally create a matrix of the skills that are relevant to service on that board, and then array your existing board members into that matrix to identify where you're void, where you need skills to fit in. And I think if you're never changing that category, something's wrong, because the category should be evolving with the business that you serve. And I think it makes a big difference to finding the right board members. And you do that not for
the matrix applies to nonprofits too, and you have to be intentional on who you recruit. Your nonprofit, if it's going to survive, has to look like your community. It has to look like the people you serve. You have to have, a couple boards I have ages 20 to 70, which is great because you have the wisdom and you have the technology and the whole range in between. You have people that have been parents, you have people that have been teachers, you have the whole range of people. So that it's really critical. It's funny though, because certain causes will attract certain pieces of the puzzle. So social emotional intelligence tended to be a lot of women wanting to do that because they got that. Men were like, we don't know what that is. And so we had to convince, that was great because it was part of our mission, was to make sure the community understood what we were trying to teach, which is managing your emotions. So now I'm happy to say that our board has actually more men than women. That was a huge accomplishment because they get it and they're so excited about it. But we have to have, diversity of thought, diversity of color, diversity of gender. We have to have all of it because we serve all kids. We have to do that. on the other side, the Phoenix is sober active recovery, and there are more men in recovery and addiction than there are women. So we wanted to make sure as a board we recruited people in recovery to make sure that we were, appealing to the audience, which is people that are trying to find a sober active lifestyle. And we ended up with a whole lot of men. And so we've been actively finding women that could come fill that out, and different age ranges, because addiction has no rules. It attacks everybody equally. So that's been interesting. But, trying to figure out all those pieces is an ongoing struggle with board work, because after all, they're volunteers. So we're asking them to pick up a pretty heavy lift when they come serve.
Okay, I think we have a question for Barb Stewart.
So I'm curious your thoughts about private company boards. Is that an easier route for a first business board, or not necessarily? And are there strategies to look at those opportunities?
I would say whether it's public or private, it's still the similar board work. The difference might be in terms of what you're dealing with in terms of an investor. If it's one or a sole, like a private equity investor, actually I think they're great opportunities to do that, because I think often the investor has a lot of insights to offer and helpful to boards. I'm not sure. I think it's a similar process in terms of networking, making sure people know that you're interested in it. And some of the most amazing business people I've seen are in the private equity world. And so I feel like there's a lot to learn there. And is it easier? I don't know. It might be more specific, meaning they're looking for a more specific fit in a private equity context, but maybe not. I don't know. I think that's an important category to think about. I also think this boards and commissions available in state and local government are really important too, all of which prove kind of your ability to understand board dynamic. So, more questions, please. Oh, yes.
Thank you. Angela, this is a question specifically for you. I serve on a private foundation board, and I got on the board because of people knew me, those relationships. And so when we talk about there's not a large representation of women on some of these corporate boards, there's not a lot of representation of individual color. And so just from your experience, can you share, what was the attraction that people asked you to join the board? I know it's a relationship, but what are some of the conversations in the board meetings that says we want to diversify what we look like and the individuals that we represent, whether it's for our corporations or whether it's for our stores or whatever?
Yeah, I think it is a lot like the conversation that Elizabeth has about not-for-profit boards. There is a passion element, and you get paid for, for-profit boards, but if you're doing it because you're getting paid, you probably shouldn't be doing it, kind of thing. So I do think making sure you think you can add value in that context. It does matter to me, and it did matter to me, that these boards were focused on diversity and wanted to add women. And the question is why? Is it sincere? Is it checking a box? Is it limited? Or is it that they sell products, or that the decision makers in their businesses are women and they want to make sure that makes a difference? I also think everyone has to think about their employment brand in a way that they maybe didn't in the past. And really, if they're saying, what do my current employees and future employees think when they look up through the organization and look in the ranks of management and they don't see women or they don't see people of color? Do they see themselves there? That's going to be huge. And so if the board doesn't reflect that, that's going to be important to them as well. So I think all of those, I do think it's relationships that often get things started. But sometimes it's a relationship to a search firm, and then there's a process that a search firm is going on. But to both of your questions, that it's gotten so much better during my kind of 12 years of being on boards. There are a majority, there's, 50-50 women on one of my boards and a committee full of women, and I'm the chair, and I'm like, yeah, well, there have been boards with all men forever, so, it's appropriate. So I do think the momentum is going towards more diversity and inclusion of women and women of color on boards and men of color on boards, and it's all a real positive. So, and Lorna's given us the signal, so we've got a 15-minute break that Lorna's going to tell us about. But thank you guys so much, and we'll be around if you want to talk later.
Thank you very much, ladies. So here's what we have going on next. Outside here with Authentic Agility Games, we will have a lounge set up. You can go out there. Downstairs, where you checked in, there's going to be a smoothie bar set up down there. Please feel free to go down and check that. And at 5 o'clock, there's a yoga class downstairs in the studio as well.